Xfinity Mobile is a new kind of network designed to save you money while streaming your favorite music, like that 90s Jams playlist you've played 72 times today. It combines America's largest, most reliable 4G LTE with the most Wi-Fi hotspots. Get up to 5 lines of unlimited nationwide talk and text included with your Xfinity internet at no extra cost. All you pay for is data. Visit an Xfinity store or click now to see how much you can save with Xfinity Mobile. Restrictions apply. Requires Xfinity internet service. Equipment, taxes, fees, and other charges extra. Limited to 2 lines pending internet activation.
Welcome to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast, your source for solutions-focused dialogue about race in America, with your host, Scott Speed.
Hello and welcome to the Race Haven Podcast. This is solutions-focused dialogue about race relations in America. My name is Dr. Scott Speed, and I am the facilitator of the dialogue. This is episode 25 of Race Haven, and today I am joined by a special guest, Dalyn Montgomery. Dalyn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Scott. How about yourself?
I am doing wonderful, and I'm very excited that you've joined me today and our Perspectives show. I'm really excited to gain your perspective on the various topics that we're going to discuss today. And again, I appreciate you carving out some time to be with me here today.
No, sure. I'm excited to be here. I'm always happy to talk, and even more happy to talk in a venue like this.
Thank you. So, Dalyn, I'm in a different location than normal. So, how's my sound? Do I sound okay?
You sound fine to me. How do I sound?
All right. You sound good, loud and clear. If you hear any background noise or anything, let me know as we proceed, but I appreciate that feedback. So as we get into it, I'd like to first tell our listeners, how we met and how you came onto the show, how you became a guest on the show. And Dalyn is a member of the Race Haven Community Dialogue Facebook group, and that's where we met initially. And I'm not sure, I'll ask Dalyn, he'll share with us how he got to Race Haven. I always like to learn that as well. But also, in addition to that, after a few months I've noticed that Dalyn was interacting, in the group. I noticed that he also had a blog, and he posted some articles. We friended each other on Facebook, and he posted a few articles, and, I read some of his blog posts, and I found him to be, a very interesting person. I found his perspective to be very interesting. And it just so happened that Dalyn reached out to me probably about a month ago and expressed the same sentiments, and he thought that I was interesting as well. And he asked if he could interview me for his for potential blog posts, and I said sure. So we had a chance to talk, and I had a chance to get to know him better, and I said, man, I think you would be a great guest on the Race Haven podcast. I would really like to share your perspective with our listeners, and, he obliged. So here we are today. I'm excited to get into it. So, Dalyn, just, if you don't mind, could you share how you came upon the Race Haven Community Dialogue on Facebook?
Sure, yeah. I found you through the podcast first. I'm always looking for new podcasts, either for my commute or in those moments of ambition where I think I'm going to go jog and get in shape once again. I'm always looking for something to listen to. And so I listen to a lot of blogs dealing with history, economics, or American black-white race relations. So under those sort of searches is how I found Race Haven and listened to a few episodes while I was trying to get in shape, and I liked it. So you had talked on the podcast about the Facebook group, and I'm pretty active on social media and online, period. So I just got connected that way. It's a subject that is something I'm passionate about and always looking to learn more and to do more with. So that's how you got me.
Awesome. I love it. I love knowing that this whole, network thing works. You put some info out there and you never know who you're going to attract. It's really exciting, and I'm so happy that you found us and that you've been, participating and engaging with us. I really appreciate your contributions, your thoughts. And, again, I want to take an opportunity to share some of them, with our listeners. So, typically we do a dialogue show, but today is going to be more of an interview format where I like to, just get to know you a little bit better and allow our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. And I'm sure that we'll, uncover some really neat things, and our listeners will gain some perspective from it. So the way I like to start, with all guests is I like to ask, because this is a show dealing with race relations in America, what is your ethnicity and where did you grow up?
All right, so it's funny, I deal with issues of diversity and race in a lot of aspects of my life, and I identify with, and I'll explain why I'm chuckling in a minute. I am a middle-class, middle-aged, heterosexual white male, which is kind of the historical harbinger of all power and privilege. And over my experience, I've realized, man, how much that's true. I grew up in a suburb of Salt Lake City, Utah, and lived in the same house in the same neighborhood from birth up until the age of 19. So I don't know if any of you have been to Sandy, Utah, but it is so homogenous. Everyone's the same religion. For the most part, everyone's the same racial background. It's one of those places where people will argue it's diverse because you've got like one representative from every subset of society, but really most everyone is white, same religion. There's no perceivable poverty, right? So everyone is pretty solidly middle class. In fact, I think in my high school boundaries, there weren't even any apartment complexes. So when it comes to my experience growing up, that was it. Grew up solidly Republican conservative as far as ideology. I am, because everyone asks this when they find I'm from Utah, I am Mormon. I was raised that way, and I'm still very much a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints today. So that's my thumbnail background.
Okay. Awesome. And thanks for that context there. And so let me ask you this. With everything you just shared, how did your upbringing impact your views on race in America pre-moving away at 19 and experiencing other places?
Sure. I one of the not to jump ahead, but one of the things that moving away really illustrated is how wrong I was about race in America without me being one of the bad guys. And what I mean by that, to answer your original question, is most of my experience, and this is, say, early 80s, mid-80s of coming of age, most everybody was white, right? There was a little bit of everybody else. I was, like, everybody there is Republican and everyone there is Mormon. So we had this sort of Western bootstrap ideology where your situation in life is a result of your work ethic and your moral fortitude, meaning if you try and work hard and you don't make big moral mistakes, then you're going to be okay. I was taught in schools. I went to public school, and I think we had a pretty good public school education, and I think I even knew who Nat Turner was and people of that nature. But at the end of the day, I think the message I was taught was that racism was over. Right? I never heard people calling anyone the N-word. We read in the history books that racism was bad, and Martin Luther King fought that battle and won, and now we need to treat everybody the same and equal and be friends with each other. And that was all reaffirmed with my religious upbringing. In Mormonism, there is this theology that God, or we call him our Father in heaven, is quite literally the father of all humanity. So God and humans are the same species, if you will, which means that everybody on earth is literally our brother and sister. We are the same family. And so with that understanding, and there's many scriptures in our theology that back up the idea that God is no respecter of persons, meaning like all are the same to God, black, white, bond, free, all those sorts of things. So we should act as God would have us treat our family. And so all of these things really kind of that set the framework of how I viewed race in society. But that being said,
okay.
It was bad. Like, we all knew, you don't use the N-word. That's bad. You don't think that somebody else, because of the color of their skin, is different than you. So that's the framework I started with.
Okay, awesome. So with that being said, again, from our previous conversation and also from reading a few of your blog posts, I know that you eventually moved away and went to Atlanta. And it seems like your experience in Atlanta really changed a lot of things for you in terms of how you saw the world in general, as well as through the lens of race relations in America, the lens of poverty in America. I believe your time in Atlanta really, impacted that in a major way. Please share some of that context with us and tell us what neighborhood. I believe it was in the. Were you in the West End of Atlanta?
I was in the West End, in the SWATS, East Point.
Yeah.
At 19,
and just time, before you get into it, hold on really quick. I'm sorry. Before you get into it, I just want to give a little context to our listeners. I'm actually in Atlanta, and I'm not sure how often I mention that, but I'm in Atlanta, and I used to teach in East Point. So Dalyn and I connect on that, and I'm from Philadelphia, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later, how we also have a connection there. But I just wanted to add that context. So yeah, go ahead and share some thoughts about Atlanta, because when you name those neighborhoods, they resonate with me.
Yeah, sure. No, so I went to Atlanta as a Mormon missionary. Those are those guys you see riding bikes wearing white shirts and ties and name tags. And if you aren't familiar with what they do, their job, it's a proselyting missionary, so that we'd go around and knock on doors and talk with people that wanted to learn more about our theology, with the idea that potentially they might want to join. So our job was to find those people and to teach those people. So, but when you sign up to go, you don't choose where you're going to go. The church finds if you're eligible, and then they tell you where you're going to go. So I went from Sandy, Utah to Atlanta, Georgia to spend 2 years. And it really flipped my world upside down in a number of different ways. So I spent 2 years just on the streets for 7 days a week, knocking on people's doors in East Point, in the West End of Atlanta, a little bit down into Forest Park, which is down just south of the airport of Atlanta. I lived on Bankhead Highway, which is just west Atlanta, for almost a year. And then I spent a little while in Marietta as well, which is the most suburban I got. And this was in 1995. So the West End of Atlanta in 1995 wasn't just a predominantly black area, but it was in this height of Afrocentric living, right? So that's all sorts of bookstores and street vendors, and everything out there was a little bit like what Arrested Development was singing about 5 years after the fact. So it was right. I can't emphasize
and how old
much
were
it was
you?
different. I can go into how it was a different world. What's that?
How old were you at that time?
19. So this would have been equivalent to most people's, say, freshman year of college. Before I went out as a missionary, I spent 1 quarter, this is before semesters, 1 quarter away at college as an art major, and then left college to go to Atlanta for 2 years.
Okay. So please continue.
Well, I guess the first thing I learned was when you go from a place that's so homogenous, including race and religion, and go to a place that's kind of it's homogenous, but on the flip side, meaning everywhere I went, it was nothing but black people, including on the billboards. Every time I came into someone's house that the TV was on, it was like Martin and Moesha were on television with all black casts. It's the first time I'd even thought of the idea or was confronted with the image of a black Santa Claus, or everybody had those pictures up in their house of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, except everyone was black. So it was this place where nobody was Mormon, where I came from, a place where everyone was Mormon. Everyone was black, where I came from, everyone was white. And I was just kind of dropped into that world, and it was somewhat unfacilitated, right? So there was no cultural training that goes into this missionary program. There's some theological training, so I knew my doctrines, but then you're just dropped on the street to go talk to people. So in that world that looked so different than what I was used to, I spent that time just talking with the people that live there, trying to help me interpret that world. And it was the first time I not only came in contact with people that had a different, I'd even say, style of living, but people who had a different philosophical outlook on life. First time I came in firsthand contact with generational poverty in great numbers as opposed to outliers. It was such an education in as far as experience goes.
Awesome.
I feel like I was talking for a whole bunch, so I don't know how much you want me to just keep going.
Well, actually, that's fine. I want to ask you a question because something that stands out to me is that when we spoke, you said that, you know, your experience there was much different than one of your partners who came from Utah with you. You said that, you know, his experience, it was almost like his experience there confirmed all of the quote-unquote negative stereotypes about what it means to be an inner city, low-income to working-class African-American, whereas you took something different away. And I wanted to know if you can provide some context about why you think that happened. But I'm sorry, well, first, what was that, the difference between how you took the experience versus how he took it, and then also why you think that happened?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the why, because I think people are different, and you interpret things through whatever lens you're wearing, right? So why somebody would interpret things different than me, I'm not always sure, right? Everyone's their own animal. But it really taught me that experience alone isn't enough for people to come to a greater understanding of things. So, for instance, I came in contact with a lot of people who were not only not doing well economically, but just seemed like they weren't trying, right? So if you spend a lot of time in poverty, there's people that are, or you see a couple guys that look like they have money, and a lot of people were asking us for money all the time. And you're assigned in pairs. And so I would be with other people that say, like, look, these people are lazy, they don't have jobs, and they keep asking me for money, right? So it's just like everybody on TV or some people back home had said, this is how black people are. Right. And I could see how it would look that way to this person, the situation. But when you really started talking to people and asking questions rather than just looking at things and making assumptions from your framework, I started to learn different things. When I started to ask people their story of how they got to where they are, what they want to do, what their hopes and dreams are, it was a little bit different. And it's not all sunny. I'd never heard the word cracker until I moved to living on Bankhead Highway, and it'd always be, you know, me and my companion would be walking down the street, and there'd always be just a pack of 7-year-olds following us around, and there'd always be the brave one that would yell cracker, and then they'd all run off giggling, right? So to me, kids hear and learn things, and they test each other, so it showed people learned that we were harmless, so kids would test each other, test us that way. And not everybody that was with me thought that was cool or interesting. They thought, see, look, this just shows that people hate us, as opposed to realizing that, you know, when I was a kid, I was stupid too. Kids do stupid things. It's what they do developmentally.
Right.
Not everybody who went through the same experience I did came out with the same understanding afterwards. What really helped me do was start to reassess things I thought. So, for example, before I get too carried away, but just I'll explain, like, when I grew up in Utah, it was, and started coming of age, is when NWA and what people called gangster rap started first to kind of cross over into suburban white world, right? And so there were a lot of guys I knew that were trying to emulate that world, which it never made sense to me. I didn't understand it musically, and I didn't understand the message they were talking, especially the people I knew that listened to it were a bunch of suburban white kids that were out trying to act tough and act hard when I knew their lives weren't that hard. And so I sort of thought that I dismissed that whole genre of music because I didn't get it, and I thought it was ridiculous. And then when I moved to Atlanta, this is when Outkast and Goodie Mob especially was really making a splash, and I was in their hometown. So even though I wasn't really listening to music, I heard their songs all the time. And I started to hear, if you go back and listen to the Goodie Mob Soul Food album, where CeeLo's verses especially is explaining people's reality, and I was standing there looking at it, and things started to click on, oh, this is what they're talking about. This makes much more sense. It doesn't look and feel like what I grew up in when I heard this other things that this grew out of. And so I started to really think, maybe I was wrong in what I thought, because now it makes sense over here. It just didn't make sense where I came from. So I would do other things, like especially when I was in Marietta, we'd go knock on doors, and 19-year-olds that are trying to find people who want to listen to will generally just gravitate to whoever will talk to you, because we got told where to go most of the time, right? So in suburban Marietta, there was a neighborhood. It was all single-family homes, but it was a black neighborhood, and people would talk to us, because I found that most in the black community, it seemed as a cultural norm that no matter what your economic status or what your religious denomination was, you would talk to somebody. You would talk to church folk. You were okay to talk to religion, and it was respectful, and so folks would talk to us. But then we go to our local congregation of Mormons who are mostly white, and they would tell us to stay out of that neighborhood because it was dangerous and bad. And that really didn't click with my experience. I'm like, why are these folks telling me that to stay out of this neighborhood because it's dangerous and bad and I'm going to get hurt, and that I shouldn't go there and they're not going to go there with me when I've been there? And this is all people with families and jobs just trying to make it. So I started to, for the first time, even within my own religious faith that had framed how I saw race in what I thought was a positive way. I saw people that shared that faith acting in some pretty blatant racist ways. And when I tried to call them on it, they would just say, well, you don't get it because you're not from here. And so I really had to start reassessing how I viewed the world when it came to race.
Interesting. So I guess what you said in terms of how people are different, I mean, it's just kind of one of those things where it really is what it is, because you and your companions or your partners who were out there with you, you had the same or some very similar experiences, but for some reason it seems like you were a little bit more open-minded and intellectually curious about understanding the reasons why the conditions were what they were, and maybe the reasons why the people reacted to you the way they did, and maybe you were a little bit more empathetic in those ways where it seemed like some of the people with you may have been more so prone to go along with whatever the stereotypical narrative was, because if you look around, you know, a lot of what they saw, what both of you saw, confirmed stereotypes, but for some reason you were able to look beyond the stereotype. And as I'm talking, I'm just thinking out loud and just really processing that myself. And I just find it interesting. And I guess it's just something that, you know, we're all different. And I can honestly say, you know, in dealing with, you know, African-American people, you know, we all, you know, I'm very intellectually curious in that way in terms of history and, you know, why things are the way they are in the world socially and things like that, politically. And there's people who just aren't. So I guess I can put it there as well, where there's some African-American people that just aren't that much interested in, you know, social or economic justice and things like that. And, you know, maybe they don't know certain things. So I guess I can kind of place it there, and they kind of fall along the same lines with, you know, going along with the various stereotypes, et cetera. Not just about European Americans, but also, you know, I hear a lot of African Americans who go along with the same stereotypes against other African Americans as well. So that's very interesting. So one of the things that you shared with me, and let's see where I want to go with this next. I guess you shared with me that your time in Atlanta also you met your wife. And your wife is an African-American woman who's a Democrat. And you grew up a conservative Republican in a homogenous European-American world. So I want to know what that was like. How was it, you know, meeting? How was it trying to put those two worlds together? And how was it accepted back home?
Sure. So I'll correct one thing, only because if there's anybody who shares my faith and experience, their antenna probably went up when you said that. So missionaries don't date at all, like zero. So okay. I didn't actually meet my wife while I was a missionary in Atlanta. I finished my 2 years, and I went back to Utah. I went to college, and I started working summer jobs to pay for school. And what was it, 3 years after I got home, I took a summer job back in Atlanta because I liked it there, and I knew the place, so I went back. And that's when I met my wife. So I was in Atlanta. I was no longer a missionary. I was a couple years removed. And I met this girl in church. So one of the things that really, I'd say, helped us help facilitate our relationship or helped us relate to each other was she had already become a member of my faith maybe a year before I met her. So she was a black Mormon, which usually in these discussions distracts everyone because people, for some reason, don't think those exist. I can tell you they do.
Right.
But when it came to that experience, I mean, us dating was a whole new education. I don't think it would have worked if, one, we didn't have religion as common ground, and two, if I, as a white guy, didn't already have some experience in her world. So when we first started dating, or I would show up to pick her up, or, normal thing, you come to the house and she's getting ready, she's not ready, and you have to hang out for the family all awkwardly. It probably took a solid month and a half to 2 months of me hanging out in the house waiting for her to finish her hair before anybody actually spoke to me. Right? It was so awkward. Everyone, and she likes to laugh because she's a good-looking girl and she used to date a lot, so there would be all kinds of dudes coming through the house. So I apparently got the same treatment most folks did. But at this time, I didn't know all that, I don't know how people are acting. But everyone was super suspicious of me until I made a joke at one time and people actually laughed, and that broke the ice. But it took us a while to get there. As opposed to when we were both back in Utah. So we dated for a summer or so. I went back to school. We dated long distance, and then she transferred out to the University of Utah where I was studying, and we kept dating there. But so when she met my family and my friends, it was really the opposite, where everyone was super welcoming and really went out of their way and fell over themselves to make sure she felt welcome. Which, once again, at its face, would kind of give you one idea of how people act if you made our two reactions as stereotypes. But they're still both really problematic. Meaning, I think my wife found living in Utah, where she was used to a very black world, going to a world that was incredibly white, where people tended to kind of treat her well. She started to feel a little bit like she was in a zoo, where like everybody was observing her and watching her all the time. She was an exotic attraction, and it really, she found it hard really getting to know people because she was a black girl as opposed to just herself, who she was used to being. People would ask her to repeat words because they thought she had a southern accent or they liked the way she talked. And, I mean, it's fun to get attention a little while, especially because she likes attention. But it starts to get a little tiring after a while when you start to question, like, where that attention is coming from, right? It's people don't really know you. They're just entertained by what you are. And that gets real old real fast.
Sure. Interesting. And did her family eventually warm up to you? Was there ever any resentment or anything that was uncomfortable in any way outside of the silence?
No. I mean, we eventually we get along fine. There's still we bump into different things that my life has taught me, and this is part of the reason why I started to become more vocal, is because I've realized I have not just an experience, but my experience has given me access to perspectives that most people don't get, because the black and white worlds really don't cross over in meaningful ways very often. Like normally we'll go to school together, we'll work together, but we don't live, eat, and play together. We don't really share our homes. So I get along great with her family. I love them. They love me. Right? I've been married for 16, going on 17 years now. So we've been around. I've got to know these folks. But still, I'm still, like, my wife and my little family, we're stuck between two worlds that still don't cross over. So we'll find little things where it'll be obvious that one group or the other really has no understanding or experience of what the other group is. So both of us will get the pandering statements from respective family or friends saying that one of us is not like the other. So I remember bowling with my in-laws, so a whole bunch of black folks bowling in the west end of Atlanta, nothing but black people in the bowling alley, and one of her sisters like complained about the music they were playing. It was all, I wasn't even paying attention because there's all this new wave 80s music, which was my music. I was into it. And she said out loud out of nowhere, "Why are they playing this white music? They know there's not one single white person in here." And I looked at her and she goes, "You don't count." Which I know what she meant, but I was kind of like, actually, I am pretty white. Like, my experience in my marriage has not changed that fact. I am who I am. And that goes both ways.
Right.
So there are little things that pop up on the regular and have continued. None of them are these glaring, horrific things for the most part. But they just help to illustrate how these two worlds really don't overlap. I should add, I had a step-grandfather who wouldn't attend our wedding because I was marrying a black girl. But I was never that close to him, but it just helped illustrate. There have been little bumps that we just kind of keep walking past. And I think everybody who's in an interracial relationship of significance will come across those, but we tend to just kind of keep moving.
Sure. That's great perspective. Thanks for sharing that. So with that being said, I wanted to ask you next, what attracted you to become interested in race relations in Atlanta? I'm sorry, not in Atlanta, in America, in the way that you are. From our conversation before, I've noticed that, it's become, even you said at the beginning of this podcast, it's something that you took an interest in. And I maybe answer, I'm thinking about it. You may have already answered that based on your experience in Atlanta and then also marrying an African-American woman. But I know you write on topics and things like that. Would you say that just your life in general and the intersection of your experiences and being in that world a little bit because of your marriage, has that caused you to be a little bit more vigilant? Because it's not just that you're interested in it. I know that you actively, are interested. You research it, you read, you write, you actively seek out diverse perspectives. So could you add a little context to that for me?
Sure. I think it probably preceded me marrying or meeting my wife a little bit. So if we talk about myself and other missionaries having the same experience in Atlanta but coming away with different views, that really led me to start asking questions. So I started looking for answers. So we had the same experience, and everyone's set up a little bit different way, but I saw things differently. And so I started to do some more formal studying to figure out how things got that way. So, for example, one of my favorite books that explained why things were the way they were in Atlanta was a book at a Princeton press by Cruz called White Flight. So it broke down block by block how Atlanta became a predominantly black city, how poverty was set up, how the politics were created. And it was in such detail and such explanation where and I didn't read this until after I was a missionary, so I'm like finding books that explain experience I had the year before, and it started to make sense. Well, I get it. I really get it. But those guys that were with me at the time that didn't ask those questions, they never got it, right? And that a lot of that's because I realized that having these experiences unfacilitated or without the contextual education doesn't lead to progress. It doesn't lead to learning. So as I started to find the explanations for the experiences I had, and things made sense, I realized, if I had known this back then, I could have helped those guys that were with me. I could have been, you know what you're seeing, here is how it got this way. Here is why. And they might have come to a different decision. And the more I've learned these sort of things and realized other people weren't learning that. And I get a little bit more motivated, not just because, how the world will affect my children, but I've realized that our perceptions, especially when it comes to race, they matter because they dictate how we vote, they dictate what policies we support, and we don't live in vacuums. So how we live and how we think will affect other people, and when you're really misinformed about the world, we can make some really bad decisions without being bad or without having ill intent. That's I think what motivates me the most is I've realized, hey, I've changed a lot of my views in a huge way, and it's not because I used to be bad. It's just because I didn't know. And I don't see those messages being communicated to the people that I grew up with.
So, but what I find interesting about that is that, a lot of, not all, but some of my conservative Republican friends or associates that I've had conversations with, they tend to reject some of the knowledge that you embraced, about, what, redlining and white flight and segregated schools, whether it be by choice or by demographic, neighborhood makeup, et cetera, or white flight being one of the things. All these various reasons why poverty persists disproportionately within a segment of the African American community. When you come with these reasons, it's like, well, that's just playing the victim. That's just an excuse. Anyone can make it because of, like, you grew up with your values of rugged individualism and et cetera, et cetera. So, again, not all, but some, if not many, conservative Republican views that I come across either online or through podcasts or through associates and friends, it's like they don't want to hear those things, but it seems like for you it was like, okay, I see why. I don't know. How does that what I just said sit with you?
No, it squares with my experience. Meaning, like, no, I agree. People seem to push that off, and I think a lot of it has to do, and this is part of what I've actually gone back to school for and tried to work, and what drives me now is trying to find ways to communicate to these people so that maybe they will be more open to these ideas. Or if we can open a dialogue. So if I'm wrong, I want somebody to tell me and explain to me why and how I'm wrong. I'm open to that. I want to know, because at the end of the day, I am concerned with being right, not just to defend my position, but I want to be on the right side of social issues. I want to be on the right side. And to be quite frank, as a religious guy, I want to be on the right side of God. Right? At the end of this day, I do have a belief that there's going to be a time when I have to answer for my actions and my thoughts. And in reality, part of this experience in mortality is we're left to kind of figure it out to some extent. So I want to be right. But I think what's lacking in so many people's views is real cross-cultural experience, right? So when you come at somebody and say, hey, redlining is how it works, but they haven't really seen or dealt with it firsthand, they're all, yeah, whatever. That's an idea. That's a story. That's complaining, because we've all met a complainer, right? So we can theorize and put our hands around somebody that's a whiner because we all know them, right? And this sounds and looks like maybe it's that. So to maybe illustrate maybe what I've had some different experience that really solidified this for me is I spent almost 10 years living in North Philadelphia. So I lived in maybe for about 8 months over by Germantown, and then for the rest of the time over in Port Richmond, so almost in that little vortex next to Kensington and North Philadelphia. And my religious congregation was made up of two groups of people. It was North Philadelphia, which if you haven't been to North Philly, man, it just looks rough, right? I live in California now, and I've been to some what people tell me are bad neighborhoods, and I haven't adjusted to it because it doesn't look like a rough neighborhood. Everywhere in Philly, including the good neighborhoods, look like a rough neighborhood. But there are some people, so many people that are just really struggling just to make it day to day. So half of the people that I worshiped with and that I spent my time with were North Philadelphia. They were black. They were Puerto Rican, that have really struggled to make it day to day for generations. The other half were people getting an MBA at Wharton. So especially at that time, Wharton, #1 business school in the world. These are guys, they've already been to Wall Street, right? They've already been there, done well, and now they're coming back so they can get that credential so they can go basically be Mitt Romney. They want to run a hedge fund. And so these are people who have access to capital, who are brilliant, and really most all of them, they're just good people too, right? So this is what you want. And these two groups came together, and you have people with the most resources that are brilliant and good, and we were trying to find solutions to help people that were struggling, that were in poverty. And you would be amazed at how hard it was, even when the poor people wanted the help. They wanted to do better, and we couldn't come up with solutions. So I was meeting poor people that weren't whining and complaining, and I was with people who had smarts and money, and we couldn't figure out how to beat the system or make it work for the poor people, right? And it was a challenge, and we met with racism. You would bring somebody up for an opportunity, and they would get rejected because somebody just looked at them and didn't like the way that they appeared. I mean, there's no other explanation for that other than racism. or when you set people up and they just can't sustain any opportunity because the structure isn't there to help them. When it takes more work to get somebody a handout than a job actually takes, so you take the job, but the job doesn't provide enough money to even meet substandard living, there's these bigger challenges. And even when you'd meet the complainer or the whiner, I would realize, well, how much would I whine if I've tried? If you try your hardest for years just to make it and it just doesn't work, how long do you keep that up before you give up? And so I had this firsthand experience that then when I combined with the book knowledge that I had to explain how these things got there, things start to click, and I go, oh, this is a much bigger deal. And this isn't the message that I'm getting either in the media or even then, in, quite frankly, in academia. I spent a lot of time in academia with sociologists and people that are trying to explain, like Julius Wilson talking about the cultural effects of poverty. I'm thinking, like, yeah, it's not just culture, it's culture and system. But these are people who aren't in the trenches, right? They're not there trying to really work
That's
with
my word.
Right? I mean, if you take, say, Ben Carson, by all, great story, brilliant man. I don't align with him politically, and I still think he's probably a great person. But I've been with people who maybe started poor, but they haven't been in that world or even touched it in 20 years. Man, a lot changes in 20 years, and you forget a lot. You don't feel the same way when it comes to relating to these issues. And I think for people to really get it into change, you have to have that experience that helps you understand and feel and know, plus the contextual book learning or history or the other academic knowledge that should go with it.
Amazing context. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to ask you, before we close out here, you wrote a blog post. I think it was the first blog post by you that I ever read, and it was about you were challenging some of the Trump supporters, and you were basically sharing your experience of what it meant to be a conservative Republican when you grew up. And you were challenging and saying, I don't know if that's what, and I may be wrong. I read it a long time ago, so I'm really paraphrasing and seeing if my memory is working a little bit, but I know you'll clean it up. But basically what I took away from it was that you were a little disappointed in how the conservative Republicans were being represented or misrepresented through the support of Donald Trump. And so I want to ask you, what are your feelings, in this time with Donald Trump being the elected president? I'm not sure. I believe this article came out before he was elected. And, just the whole, I guess, climate right now, political climate right now, with Donald Trump representing the Republican Party, and, I know you grew up Republican, but Donald Trump wasn't necessarily always a Republican, all that stuff that comes with that. If you could just briefly kind of, summarize what your feelings and thoughts were in that blog post and kind of what you see, or what not only what you see happening over the next 4 to 8 years, but what you hope will happen over the next 4 to 8 years.
Man, that's a lot to chew on.
That's a lot. That's a lot. I know.
That's a lot. I'm cool with that. But so I'm a registered independent and have been since I moved to Georgia after I was a missionary. I grew up as a conservative Republican, too young to vote, but it's kind of how you're raised, so that's what you think you are during the Clinton years. And as a religious person with conservative religious values, we all thought Hillary and Bill were just the worst thing ever. Like the Monica Lewinsky scandal was just such an embodiment of all that was wrong in the world, and conservative family religious values were what Republicans stood for, and that's what we were against, this moral decline of civilization. And so that's the context I grew up in. And when I first moved to Atlanta, it was during Sonny Perdue's, I think it was his governor's campaign, and one of the platforms in the Republican Party was to bring the Confederate battle flag back to the state flag because it had been removed. They wanted that back on there, and that's what it meant to be a Republican in Georgia, was the Confederate battle flag needs to be on the state house, and that terrified me. So it wasn't that, that wasn't what Republican meant to me in my world, and I couldn't affiliate with that idea of putting that symbol on a representation of our government in our state. So that's when I really realized that politics are local. So what I thought it meant with this big R Republican is not what it meant everywhere. So it really loosened those ties and made me think I need to look at the local context. So if we fast forward that on to, say, Trump and Obama and our current climate, what's going to happen, I'm not sure. And what I hope happens, I mean, there's a whole basket of those things. And I'm really reticent to make any sort of policy predictions, not just because he's unpredictable, but I'm not against somebody that I think many things about him and his character are pretty deplorable, right? So as I am pretty conservative, what most people think of as conservative when it comes to kind of the rules I live my life by, like the idea that you would cheat on 2 wives before you marry your third. Like infidelity is just it's horrible, right? There's no way to hurt other people more than in marital infidelity, and he seems pretty unrepentant when it comes to that in many sorts of ways. So all that aside, if he accomplishes some great things, if he repeals Obamacare, but for some reason more people get sufficient health care, I would love that. Do I think that's what's going to happen? I don't know, and I doubt it. But when it comes to race and when it comes to this, I think the past 8 years have really demonstrated what I'm afraid is what I see happening and what there's a historical precedent happening, and what I think more people like yourself and more people like the people in this venue need to do is to speak up, is because there is this historical pushback against black progress or against anything that would lead to actual equity or equality and opportunity and rights. Meaning if you look through history, even back in the slave days when early colonial Virginia, when people started to become more homogenous, is when you started to get these laws that made slavery a race-based rather than economic-based institution, right? Because people started getting too close. I mean, too many black people started doing too well. Once black people started to mobilize and you have Nat Turner's revolt, you have this white reaction. That's when you get the fugitive slave laws. Right? After the Civil War and black people get the vote and they start to get participation is when you have the Ku Klux Klan and the end of Reconstruction fighting against that. So every time there's this move up, there's a white lash, as we've called it now, right? This pushback. And I see that happening with Barack Obama, where there's what looks like some progress. And I think now we have this emboldened right wing, because that's generally the direction that it comes from. But without politicizing it, there's been a real reaction to black progress, because I think my people, if we call it that, white people, even the good ones, don't have the perspective or the understanding we truly are as a group. So there's always individuals, but as a group, we're really ignorant to the black experience of how black Americans experience and are treated in this world. We really, really don't get it. And because we're so ignorant of black people's reality, we misinterpret what we see going on and we react. And I think our reactions are just wrong, no matter if they're coming from a place of wanting to help or a political philosophy we think is right. It's just not how it's going. So I am really nervous for the future of race relations. I think even the good people are starting to get pushed in a bad direction, where I see a divergence in people seeing eye to eye and equal opportunities and things of that nature. So I'm a little nervous. I think we have work to do.
Interesting. So you think that Donald Trump wields that much power, where he, I guess, with, as people said, the rhetoric during the campaign, it's really emboldening that that fear that was, I guess, hidden or I'm sorry, was always there. It's the pushback. That's really the best way to say it. So you feel like, and this is rhetorical at this point because you said it already, but you feel, I'm just kind of repeating that, you feel like, it's real in terms of that pushback and what has been called white lash, that's a very real thing, and that people who are for equality and for, equal civil and human rights, et cetera, need to have our antennas up to kind of be ready to push back and fight back against those things. That's interesting that you say that, because it's interesting to get that perspective from you, as a European American man. I guess I'm just I'm hopeful, and I know people at times may think I'm naive in how I view these things, but time will tell. I just tend not to, operate from a standpoint of fear, so I just won't take that on personally. But I am, because kind of, I guess the stance that I've taken with that whole sentiment is that things have always been challenging for African Americans, especially poor African Americans. Things have always been challenging, and I don't see why, Donald Trump being elected all of a sudden makes things that much worse. When I read the book, The New Jim Crow, I'm like, I can't even get through it because I'm so disgusted with how poor African American people are treated by the criminal justice system, and that's been going on, since the end of slavery, and in some fashion, it's been going on up until present. So always been going on. People have always been getting killed by the police. People have always been getting beat up by the police. African American people have always been getting beat up and killed by the police disproportionately, because I know it happens to other ethnicities as well, but disproportionately. And systemic poverty and systemic racism has always negatively impacted African American people. So I guess my pushback that some people may have heard from me in the past or seen me post something on Facebook about or talk on the podcast about, it's just that I just feel like that sense of urgency should always be there. It should have always been there, and Donald Trump being elected, for me, it just didn't change me. I was already kind of in the mindset that we have to continue to chip away at those structural and cultural and political issues. So,
agreed.
I just wanted to add that. But go ahead.
No. Let me add that final pushback to your pushback. That final part. I agree. I think you're right on those. I think we have to come with this idea of positivity, because my life has taught me that people can change in their perception. If I can change, and I'm really not that different than people, then everybody else like me can change too, or become better, as I think it's become better. But where I think there's a call to action, and it's not like Donald Trump has created all this. He is evidence of something that exists already.
Right.
My plea is to the white masses, right? Because really, black people have always struggled, right? And it's not right that they have had to struggle. And so my call is to the white population to listen and to adjust, because the best way to have a holistic change for the better is the people who have the most influence numerically and power and socially are the ones who need to sustain and give that change. And I have concern knowing, and I've learned, that sort of change in a positive direction isn't natural and inevitable. It has to be intentional. Meaning, if we just sit here and do nothing, we, the white population, if we do what we normally have always done, there will, in fact, be no change for the better. So I think there's this responsibility, there's this need, and it's an urgent need that white people need to listen. We need to do better. We need to know more. And we have to be active. Otherwise, things, no matter how positive we are, I mean, black people are resilient as a whole.
Absolutely.
Unnecessarily. And so, I mean, I guess one good thing with Trump is that one of the failings after the post-civil rights movement is once there had been legal and legislative change, many of us thought the war was over, and we kind of dropped the PR battle of understanding and true awareness to support the white political will, to support the final steps to actual equality of opportunity. And we're not there yet, and we're slipping away from that. So that's where my urgency, and that's where it's not fear, but it's this drive for urgency that the white populace, we got to do better. Otherwise, we're just going to have to keep fighting this fight. And I think we can win it. It can be won. I'm not a defeatist.
I appreciate that. And, and I also appreciate you as a European American male taking that stance and calling out other European Americans, because, one of the other things that I've said in the past is that, with European Americans being the majority in this country, the overwhelming majority in this country, I feel like there has to be a level of leadership there in terms of making this sounds weird the way I'm saying it, but I think people will understand the sentiment. Like if I invite you into my home, I want to make you feel comfortable. And I always urge, or in the past I've had that kind of made that analogy with European Americans, that even if you don't understand, some of the struggles and some of the psychological trauma and generational pass down of that trauma, be empathetic and, work with African Americans and other ethnic minorities to help them feel comfortable. Because, with you all being the majority, I feel like that's just something that, you should take the responsibility in doing. And that's kind of what I got
whether or
from what
not
you
we
just
stole
said.
that. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Whether or not we stole the house or how we got it, we got the keys to the house now. So since we got the keys to the house
I'm glad
now,
you added
we
that
have
layer.
the responsibility of making people feel welcome.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you added that layer of nuance as well. So, with that being said, that's our time for today. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to join me. We have to do this again. I have to get you on with my co-host, John Costino, at some point to have a dialogue about a particular topic. I know that you're good at thinking through complexity, and there's certain things that I think will take this movement to the next level just in the way we speak it, in the way that we say certain things that I feel like we need to do a better job of thinking complexity and speaking complexity and unpacking complexity. And I think that you would be a good candidate to kind of help me go through some of those thoughts I've been developing for a long time.
Let's do it.
So I will be reaching back out to you, man. So I really appreciate it. So really quick, if you could briefly tell our listeners how they can connect with you on your blog, give us your, your website, that would be great.
Sure. The best place to find me is at brohamas.com, and Brohamas is BROHAMMAS.com. The email address is brohamas@gmail.com. If you want to know what that word means, you can go to the website and click around and see if you can figure it out. But I'm happy to talk with people. I'm happy. This is where my passions lie. I really think we can have a better world, and I think that it's not going to happen by magic. We have to do something to make it happen. So let's do it.
I agree, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us, and we'll be talking soon. So with that being said, for our listeners, I want to – my pleasure. And I also want to thank our listeners. Thank you, listeners, for joining us for this episode of Perspectives. It's our first Perspectives titled show in a series of guests that I'll be bringing on for them to share what I believe is unique perspectives that they have on life because of their experiences, much like Dalyn just shared with us. Be sure to subscribe to the Race Haven podcast on your iPhone through the podcast app or the Stitcher Radio app for iPhone and Android so that you never miss the dialogue. And if you love this show, please leave us a review on the podcast and Stitcher apps. I want to say that again because no one's left us a review, and I know we have, over the course of the last year, and we just reached a year old, we've had thousands of listeners. So if you could please, leave a comment, that would really mean a lot to me. And, this will help the show gain more visibility and listeners. And we want to hear from you. We always welcome you to email us your perspectives at solutions@racehavenpodcast.com, and we may get a chance to read a few of them on a future show. Please visit the Race Haven Podcast Facebook page or racehavenpodcast.com and leave comments and questions about today's show. You can also find the older shows, past shows, on and the racehavenpodcast.com. I'm sorry, not the, but just racehavenpodcast.com. You can also join our online community by joining Race Haven Community Dialogue Facebook group. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with your friends on all of your social media, email, text, however you can share, please share. Race Haven is a safe place for people from diverse ethnic, religious, cultural, and political backgrounds to bring their race-based perspectives, questions, assumptions, frustrations, and experiences to engage in thoughtful, honest dialogue in an effort to transcend race and unify America. Remember, we are all smarter when we think together. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast. Be sure to visit www.racehavenblog.com to comment and learn more.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive number 1, number 2 employee. Leave a message at the... Hey, Jamie, it's me, Jamie. This is your daily pep talk. I know it's been rough going ever since people found out about your a cappella group, Mad Harmony, but you will bounce back. I mean, you're the guy always helping people find coverage options with the Name Your Price tool. It should be you giving me the pep talk. Now get out there, hit that high note, and take Mad Harmony all the way to nationals this year! Sorry, it's pitchy.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.